Growing up in my family, there was a tradition that seemed normal until I discovered it was actually killing us. In our community, a daughter's worth was measured by the scale, and the heavier she was, the higher her value in the marriage market. Every girl who turned 13 in our family was sent away to what they called the preparation house, where she had to gain at least £200 in 2 years or face severe consequences. The day I found my grandmother's hidden ledger listing 47 young women who had died during this process, along with their final weights and the profit margins from their marriages, everything changed for me. I was 11 when I made that discovery, searching through my grandmother Eleanor's closet for birthday money she'd promised me. Behind rows of pristine dresses and boxes of jewellery, I found 3 leather-bound notebooks wrapped in plastic. My hands trembled as I opened them, expecting to find family photos or maybe old letters. Instead, I found names and numbers that would haunt me forever. Sarah, age 22, cardiac arrest at £389. Melissa, age 19, diabetic coma at £412. Jennifer, age 24, stroke at £445. Page after page documented young women who never lived to see 30. And beside each name was a calculation showing how much money the family had made from their marriage settlements, minus funeral costs. The preparation house stood at the edge of our property, a sprawling Victorian mansion that had been converted decades ago for this specific purpose. From the outside, it looked almost pleasant with its white paint and wraparound porch, but the windows had bars disguised as decorative ironwork, and the doors locked from the outside. I'd watched my older cousins disappear through those doors, walking in on their own feet and emerging 2 years later in wheelchairs, their bodies transformed beyond recognition. My cousin Rebecca had entered at £115 and left at £340. She was married within a week to a businessman who paid extra for what they called her beauty marks, though I knew they were stretch marks from the rapid weight gain. I remember watching her struggle for breath as she walked down the aisle, her face flushed and swollen, her father beaming with pride at the price she'd fetched. The process was methodical and relentless. 6 meals a day, each one carefully monitored by the house matrons, who were usually older women from the family who'd been through the process themselves. The girls would sit in a circle while these women ladled enormous bowls of calorie-dense foods down their throats. The menu was specifically designed for maximum weight gain with minimal nutrition. Breakfast might be pancakes drowning in butter and syrup, followed by a shake made from ice cream, weight gain powder, and whole milk. Mid-morning brought plates of pasta swimming in cream sauce. Lunch was fried chicken, mashed potatoes loaded with butter, and vegetables cooked in bacon fat. The afternoon snack consisted of entire cheesecakes or dozens of donuts. Dinner repeated the pattern with steaks, loaded baked potatoes, and desserts that could feed a family. Before bed, another shake, this one mixed with melted butter and sugar to add even more calories. The daily target was 20,000 calories minimum, an amount that would make professional competitive eaters struggle. Physical activity was strictly forbidden, except for specific exercises designed to help them swallow faster and stretch their throats to accommodate more food. My sister Emma had tried doing squats in secret, desperate to maintain some muscle tone beneath the enforced weight gain. When the matrons caught her, they force-fed her until her stomach was so distended she couldn't move, then made her eat standing up for a month as punishment, claiming it would help the food settle faster. The psychological torture was as calculated as the physical transformation. The house matrons had developed techniques over generations to maximize weight gain. Salt baths that caused severe water retention, medications that increased appetite while slowing metabolism, supplements that blocked the body's natural satiety signals. They would wake the girls in the middle of the night for additional feeding sessions, disrupting their sleep cycles to further slow their metabolisms. Some girls developed a condition where their stomachs stretched so much they could never feel full again, condemning them to a lifetime of constant hunger even after leaving the house. After discovering those death ledgers, I couldn't look at my family the same way. Every celebration, every gathering, became a reminder of the girls who weren't there, whose lives had been traded for money that funded our comfortable lifestyle. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. The way my grandmother's house was the largest in town, built with money from generations of selling daughters. The expensive cars in our driveway, the designer clothes, the private schools, all paid for with the pounds of flesh extracted from young women who had no choice in their fate. I knew my time was coming. In 2 years, I would turn 13 and be sent to that house. The thought terrified me, but it also motivated me. If I was going to survive, I needed a plan. That's when I started my cooking circle for the younger girls in our family and community. To the adults, it looked like I was preparing the next generation for their time in the preparation house, teaching them traditional recipes and proper eating techniques. What I was really doing was teaching them chemistry and biology, showing them how to survive what was coming. Every Thursday afternoon, we gathered in my Uncle Robert's garage. I'd set up a makeshift kitchen with hot plates and mixing bowls, but hidden beneath the cooking supplies were chemistry textbooks and medical journals I'd stolen from the local library. I taught the girls about water retention and how consuming specific amounts of salt could make them gain 20 pounds of water weight temporarily for weigh-ins. We learned about digestive enzymes and how certain combinations of foods could slow absorption, making it look like they were eating more than they actually were. I showed them how to make fake fat suits using memory foam and layered fabrics that could add 50 pounds to their appearance while weighing almost nothing. The lessons went beyond just physical tricks. We practiced eating competitions where girls learned to hold food in their cheeks without swallowing, developing the muscle control to keep it there for hours. I taught them about ipecac and other substances that could induce vomiting silently and how to mask the smell with stronger foods. We developed a system of herbal teas that suppressed appetite while causing facial bloating that mimicked weight gain. Some girls learned to trigger their gag reflex through specific pressure points, allowing them to appear to swallow while actually preventing the food from going down. My greatest innovation was suggesting we document our journey for what I called marriage preparation portfolios. The adults loved the idea, thinking it would help advertise the girls to potential husbands. We took hundreds of photos, but I taught the girls exactly which angles, poses and clothing choices could make them appear 50 to 100 pounds heavier than they actually were. We studied photography and light, learning how certain shadows and positions could create the illusion of mass. I even managed to acquire a broken scale from a medical supply company that was closing down. With some simple modifications, it would add 80 pounds to any reading. We practiced switching it during official weigh-ins, developing a choreographed routine that made the swap invisible. By the time I turned 13 and entered the preparation house myself, I had trained 15 girls in what I called the art of survival. We had an entire network in place, with codes and signals for communication. Girls on the outside would leave coloured ribbons on the fence to pass messages. Red meant danger, someone was suspicious. Yellow meant caution, be extra careful with the deception. Green meant all clear, proceed with plans. We had older girls who'd aged out of the system but sympathised with our cause, who would smuggle in supplies, hollowed-out shoes filled with ipecac, special undergarments with hidden pockets for hiding food, bottles of diuretics disguised as vitamins. Inside the preparation house, the reality was even worse than I'd imagined. The smell hit you first, a mixture of grease, vomit, and desperation that seemed to seep into the wallpaper. Girls sat in rows of reinforced chairs, some too heavy to stand without assistance, mechanically lifting spoons to their mouths with dead eyes. The newest arrivals cried through every meal, while the house matrons cooed encouragement that sounded more like threats. "Eat up, dear, only 40 more pounds to go this month." "You don't want to disappoint your family, do you?" "Remember what happened to Grace when she failed to meet her targets?" I met Grace on my 3rd day. She'd been in the house for 18 months and had only gained 150 pounds, 50 short of her goal. As punishment, she was put on the intensive program, which meant being hooked up to a feeding tube for 16 hours a day while still being required to complete her regular meals. Her arms were covered in bruises from where they'd held her down to insert the tube, and she'd developed a tremor in her hands from the constant flow of calories her body couldn't process. But Grace became one of my strongest allies. Despite everything they'd done to her, her spirit wasn't broken. She helped me establish our resistance network within the house. We taught the other girls our techniques, showing them how to make themselves appear heavier without actually gaining the weight. It was dangerous work. The house matrons were always watching, and punishment for any sign of resistance was severe. But desperation made us creative. We developed an elaborate system of misdirection. During mealtimes, girls would create distractions. Maybe someone would have a coughing fit or accidentally knock over a pitcher of water, giving others precious seconds to spit food into hidden containers. We learned to work the blind spots in the dining room, places where the matrons couldn't see every movement. Food would be passed from hand to hand, eventually making its way to the few girls who had genuinely given up and would eat anything to avoid punishment. They became our unwitting accomplices, consuming the calories meant for others. The bathroom situation was closely monitored, but we found ways around that too. The older pipes in the Victorian house could handle a lot if you knew which ones to use. We created schedules for flushing food, timing it with the loudest parts of the day when the noise would be masked. Some girls became experts at induced vomiting, able to empty their stomachs in under 30 seconds without making a sound. We shared techniques like drinking warm salt water to make the process easier, or pressing specific points on the abdomen to trigger the reflex. Our fake fat suits evolved into works of art. Using materials smuggled in by our outside network, we created incredibly realistic padding that moved like real flesh. The suits were constructed in layers that could be added gradually to show progression. We studied medical texts to understand how weight distributed on different body types, making sure our deceptions looked authentic. The memory foam was carved and shaped to create realistic rolls and bulges, then covered with a silk-like material that felt similar to skin through clothing. The psychological warfare was constant. The house matrons would tell us stories about girls who'd resisted and ended up homeless, disowned by their families. They'd bring in successfully married women to give testimonials about how happy they were, though we could see the pain in their eyes and hear the wheeze in their breath as they spoke. They played recordings of our families talking about how proud they'd be when we emerged properly prepared, how much they'd sacrificed to give us this opportunity. The guilt was meant to break us down, make us compliant, but we had our own support system. Late at night, when the matrons were asleep, we'd gather in small groups to remind each other why we were fighting. We'd recite the names from the death ledgers like a prayer, keeping their memory alive. Sarah, Melissa, Jennifer, and all the others who'd been sacrificed for profit. We'd share stories about what we wanted to do with our lives, beyond being sold to the highest bidder. Dreams of education, careers, love based on choice, not weight. The turning point came during my cousin Diana's marriage viewing. She was supposed to be £300 after 2 years in the preparation house. The viewing was a formal event where potential husbands and their families could inspect the bride, checking her weight, examining her stretch marks, even requiring her to eat in front of them to prove her capacity. Diana had been one of my first students in the cooking circle, and she'd perfected the art of the fake fat suit. The viewing was held in my grandmother's ballroom, with Diana displayed on a platform in the centre, while 3 potential husbands circled her like vultures. The most aggressive bidder was a man in his 50s who ran a successful construction company. He'd already buried 2 wives from our family, both of whom had died before 30 from complications related to their weight. He was particularly interested in Diana's apparent mobility despite her size, poking at her arms and legs to assess the distribution of fat. When it came time for the clothing removal ceremony, where the bride would strip down to special undergarments to show the authenticity of her weight gain, Diana's carefully constructed suit began to shift. Maybe it was nerves, or maybe the tape holding certain sections had weakened, but suddenly, a large section of padding slipped, revealing her actual slim waist beneath. The room went silent for a heartbeat before erupting in chaos. The groom's family screamed about fraud and demanded their gifts back. My Uncle Michael grabbed Diana by the hair, shouting about family honour and the shame she'd brought upon us. But then something extraordinary happened. 23 girls who'd been brought to witness the viewing as motivation stood up simultaneously and began peeling off their own fat suits. Pounds and pounds of carefully crafted padding hit the floor with thuds that echoed through the ballroom. I stood up and pulled out my phone, showing everyone the photos I'd taken of the death ledgers, scrolling through page after page of girls who died for this tradition. The chaos that followed was indescribable. Mothers screamed, fathers raged, and the potential grooms' families pushed through the crowd, demanding explanation. My grandmother Eleanor's face turned purple as she watched her empire crumble with each piece of discarded padding that hit her polished floor. I kept my phone raised high, making sure everyone could see the evidence. The names, the weights, the profit calculations all displayed for the entire room to witness. Someone had already called the police, tipped off by a sympathetic aunt who'd lost her own daughter years ago. The officers arrived to find a scene they couldn't quite process: dozens of young women stripping off fake fat suits while their families raged about tradition and honor. The lead officer, a woman named Detective Patricia Chen, took one look at the death records on my phone and immediately called for backup and medical personnel. My mother tried to wrestle the phone away from me, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. But I'd been preparing for this moment, and I twisted free, backing toward the officers, while still displaying the evidence. Detective Chen began separating the girls from their families, creating a protective barrier while more officers arrived. The medical personnel started examining girls who showed signs of genuine weight-related distress, documenting conditions that would become crucial evidence in the investigation that followed. My grandmother pushed through the crowd, her cane striking the marble floor with sharp cracks that sounded like gunshots. She reached for Diana, who was still standing in her undergarments after removing the fat suit. But 3 girls immediately surrounded my cousin, linking arms to create a protective shield. It was a beautiful moment of solidarity. Young women who'd been pitted against each other in competition for survival now standing together in resistance. The house matrons arrived next, summoned by frantic phone calls from family members. They surveyed the scene with horror, watching their star pupils revealed as normal-weight teenagers who'd fooled them for months or even years. Martha, the head matron, actually fainted when she saw the modified scale sitting in the corner, its altered mechanism exposed for all to see. She'd been so proud of the weight gains she'd achieved, never suspecting she'd been recording false numbers all along. The police spent the entire night taking statements. Each girl told her story while family members paced outside, some shouting threats through the windows, others weeping as the reality of what they'd been part of finally hit them. My Uncle Michael tried to storm back in twice before officers restrained him, screaming about how we'd destroyed centuries of tradition. As dawn broke over our town, 23 families had daughters who'd exposed the deception, and the divide cut through our community like a surgical blade. The aftermath moved quickly but chaotically. Within days, half the families had withdrawn their daughters from our resistance group, terrified of being associated with the scandal. Some girls were locked in their rooms, their families attempting to force them back into compliance. Others were sent away to relatives in other states, their parents hoping distance would break the bonds we'd formed. My own parents took shifts guarding my door, ensuring I couldn't escape or communicate with the other girls. But we'd anticipated this reaction. Before the wedding viewing, I'd uploaded copies of the death ledgers to multiple cloud storage accounts and shared access with trusted allies. I'd also hidden physical copies in various locations, ensuring the evidence couldn't be suppressed. Even locked in my room, I knew the truth was spreading beyond my family's ability to contain it. My sister Emma became their first target for re-education. They forced her back into the preparation house, this time with a dedicated monitor who watched her swallow every bite. But Emma had learned our techniques well. She could hold food in her cheeks for hours, slowly letting it dissolve rather than swallowing. She knew which pressure points would trigger her gag reflex silently and how to create the appearance of consumption while actually consuming very little. The house matrons grew desperate. They instituted new rules requiring girls to open their mouths after each bite, checking under tongues and in cheek pouches like prison guards searching for contraband. They weighed girls before and after bathroom visits, documenting any suspicious weight loss. They installed cameras in the dormitories and bathrooms, violating any sense of privacy in their determination to maintain control. But the resistance adapted. Girls learned to trigger vomiting through pressure points that didn't require fingers down the throat. They discovered that certain spice combinations could cause temporary inflammation that mimicked weight gain for weigh-ins. They shared techniques through coded songs during mandatory rest periods, hiding information in lyrics that sounded like traditional lullabies. The network evolved, becoming more sophisticated in response to each new security measure. 3 weeks after the wedding viewing, Hannah became the first to break. The pressure from her family, combined with threats to her younger sisters if she didn't comply, proved too much. She appeared at my window one night, tears streaming down her face, to tell me she was going to submit to the fattening process. Her betrayal stung, but I understood. Not everyone could endure their mother's tears or their father's rage indefinitely. We'd known from the beginning that some would fall away when the cost became real. The police investigation moved slowly, hampered by families closing ranks and girls recanting their statements under pressure. Parents claimed the death records were fabricated, that we'd been manipulated by modern influences and outside agitators. Some even suggested we'd been drugged or brainwashed, anything to avoid acknowledging the truth of what they'd been part of. The physical evidence of the modified scale helped, but many families claimed it was planted, that we'd created it ourselves to support our lies. My Aunt Victoria arrived at our house with a proposal that she painted as merciful. If I publicly apologized and submitted to the preparation house for just 6 months, they would forget this whole unfortunate incident. She spoke of family honor, of the shame I'd brought upon generations of tradition. She reminded me of all the girls who'd successfully completed the process and were living happy lives, conveniently ignoring those who died or were suffering from severe health complications. When I refused, they moved me to my grandmother's compound, where the surveillance was even tighter. The windows were barred, the doors locked from the outside, and guards posted to ensure I had no contact with the outside world. They believed isolation would break my resolve, that without the support of the other girls I would crumble and beg to be accepted back into the family fold. But they underestimated the bonds we'd forged and the ingenuity of teenage girls determined to survive. Even separated, we found ways to communicate. Laundry lines became message systems with coloured clothes arranged in specific patterns to convey information. Kitchen servants who sympathised with our cause carried whispers between houses. Younger children, too innocent to understand what they were doing, became unwitting couriers for coded messages hidden in their games and songs. The preparation house itself became a battleground, with half the girls genuinely trying to gain weight out of fear or family pressure and the other half still secretly resisting. Tensions ran high. Meals became strategic operations where resistant girls had to maintain their deception while surrounded by those who'd given in. The matrons grew increasingly paranoid, implementing random weight checks and surprise inspections that could happen at any hour of the day or night. Despite the pressure, small victories kept us going. Lucy, one of the youngest girls in the house, managed to maintain her weight for 3 months while appearing to gain steadily. She'd perfected the art of waterloading before weigh-ins and had created such a realistic fat suit that even physical examinations didn't reveal the deception. Her success inspired others to maintain their resistance even as the methods of control grew more extreme. The first major breakthrough in the investigation came through Sophia's courage. Despite her family's threats and the loss of her inheritance, she maintained her testimony to the police and provided detailed accounts of the force-feeding, the punishments for resistance, and the medical complications she'd witnessed. Her medical records showed liver damage from the extreme diet, joint problems from rapid weight gain, and psychological trauma that would take years to heal. Her steadfastness inspired 3 others to reinforce their own statements, creating a foundation of evidence that couldn't be dismissed as teenage rebellion. Health officials arrived to inspect the preparation house, documenting conditions that shocked even experienced investigators. They found girls with untreated diabetes, dangerously high blood pressure, and mobility issues that no teenager should face. The feeding schedules were deemed dangerous by any medical standard, and the complete lack of nutritional balance in the diet was creating long-term health problems that would follow these girls for the rest of their lives. My grandmother's response was swift and calculated. She organized the matriarchs of other families to create a unified front, claiming cultural persecution and discrimination. They hired expensive lawyers to challenge any potential charges, arguing that traditional practices were protected under religious freedom laws. They painted themselves as victims of a modern world trying to destroy time-honored customs, conveniently ignoring the death toll those customs had created. But cracks appeared in their alliance. Some mothers, confronted with the death records and health reports, began questioning whether tradition was worth their daughters' lives. Hushed conversations in grocery stores and beauty salons revealed growing doubts. Mothers who'd lost daughters to weight-related complications years ago finally began speaking up, admitting what they'd always suspected, but been too afraid to voice that the tradition was killing their children. The turning point came when Margaret's mother found her daughter's hidden journal. In it, Margaret had documented every forced feeding, every punishment for not finishing a meal, every night she'd cried herself to sleep with stomach pains. She'd written about her dreams of becoming a teacher, of traveling the world, of falling in love with someone who valued her mind, not her body weight. Her mother read it and wept for hours, finally understanding the true cost of what they'd been doing. That evening, she arrived at the police station with the journal and her own testimony about the profit system, the bride price negotiations, and the pressure on mothers to produce valuable daughters. Her betrayal of the matriarchs sent shockwaves through our community. My grandmother convened an emergency meeting that lasted through the night, with raised voices audible from the street. Some families wanted to accelerate the fattening schedule before authorities could intervene further. Others advocated for negotiation with law enforcement, trying to find a compromise that would preserve some element of the tradition while addressing the most dangerous aspects. The moderate faction proposed reforms like setting maximum weight gain limits and requiring medical monitoring, but my grandmother and her allies rejected any change, viewing it as the first step toward complete abandonment of their way of life. As the meeting ended without resolution, I watched from my barred window as the community divided into clear camps. Progressive families began withdrawing their daughters from the preparation house entirely, some leaving town to escape the social pressure. Traditional hardliners doubled down, moving their operations to more secret locations and implementing even stricter controls on the girls still in their custody. The battle lines were drawn, and there would be no going back to the way things were. My imprisonment continued, but I drew strength from knowing the movement survived without me. Every day brought new reports filtered through our communication network of girls refusing meals, families questioning tradition, and authorities documenting abuses. The police finally had enough evidence to take formal action, arriving at the preparation house with health inspectors, social workers, and medical personnel. What they found there would become the foundation of a larger investigation that exposed similar practices in communities throughout the region. The health inspectors documented conditions that made even hardened police officers sick. Girls lay on mattresses soaked with sweat and other bodily fluids, their ankles so swollen they couldn't walk. The feeding logs showed schedules that would have challenged professional competitive eaters, with punishments for anyone who couldn't keep up. Medical charts revealed a litany of untreated conditions that no young person should face: diabetes, hypertension, fatty liver disease, and joint damage that would require surgery. The compound where I was held erupted in activity as news of the raid spread. Through my small window, I watched my grandmother's lieutenants arrive throughout the day, their faces grim as they strategized damage control. The matriarchs had underestimated how thoroughly we documented their system over the years. Every death, every profit calculation, every girl sacrificed for bride prices was now laid bare under official scrutiny. The house matrons attempted to explain away the conditions, claiming the girls had underlying health issues unrelated to the feeding process. But the medical evidence painted a clear picture of systematic abuse. Blood work showed cholesterol levels that would be dangerous in people 3 times these girls' age. Liver enzymes indicated damage from processing massive amounts of fat and sugar. Kidney function tests revealed the strain of the salt baths and water retention techniques. My isolation became more severe as the investigation intensified. They moved me to an interior room with no windows, only a small ventilation grate near the ceiling. 2 women guarded my door at all times, preventing any communication attempts. Meals arrived 3 times daily, carefully portioned, to begin my own fattening process. They believed that if they could break me, if they could show the other girls that even the resistance leader had given in, the rebellion would crumble. But I employed every technique I'd taught the others. Food hidden in my cheeks would slowly dissolve over hours while I pretended to swallow. I'd trigger my gag reflex through practiced tongue movements when the guards weren't watching closely. The process was exhausting and painful, but less painful than the alternative. The guards grew frustrated watching me take hours to finish a single bowl, reporting my resistance to my grandmother with increasing alarm. Their response was to attempt force-feeding. 4 women held me down while a 5th tried to insert a feeding tube. I thrashed and bit, making the process impossible without causing serious injury. They eventually gave up, but not before leaving bruises on my arms and legs from their grip. My grandmother stood watching from the doorway, her face a mask of cold fury that would have terrified me if I hadn't been so focused on survival. The compound transformed into a fortress as the investigation continued. Guards patrolled the perimeter, preventing any contact between resistant girls and the outside world. Delivery people were searched, mail was intercepted, and even the youngest children faced interrogation about their activities. My grandmother knew the network still functioned despite our separation, and her paranoia grew with each passing day. News filtered through despite their precautions. A sympathetic guard who'd lost her own daughter to the tradition years ago would whisper updates while pretending to check my room. The police investigation had expanded beyond our district to the state level. Health officials from the capital were reviewing similar practices throughout the region, finding patterns of abuse that stretched back generations. Our small rebellion had exposed a system that operated across state lines, with families sharing techniques and even trading daughters to avoid local scrutiny. Some families panicked and accelerated their daughters' fattening schedules, hoping to complete the process before authorities could intervene. Reports came of girls being fed around the clock, their protests silenced with sedatives and threats. The traditional hardliners grew desperate as their profit model faced extinction. Marriage negotiations stalled as potential grooms questioned whether they wanted brides who might die within months of the wedding, leaving them with funeral costs and no return on their investment. My own family fractured under the pressure. My mother visited me late one night, tears streaming down her face as she begged me to comply to save our family's reputation. She spoke of the shame, the whispers in the grocery store, the way other women turned away when she approached. She told me about the threatening phone calls, the dead animals left on our doorstep, the way my younger siblings were being ostracized at school. I remained silent, knowing any response would only fuel her anguish, but inside my heart broke for the pain my resistance was causing those I loved. My father took a different approach, arriving with photo albums showing successful marriages from previous generations. He pointed to smiling brides beside their husbands, talking about how the system had worked for decades, how it ensured daughters were valued and provided for. His words rang hollow as I remembered the death records, the profit calculations beside each girl's name, the fact that none of those smiling brides had lived past 40. When he saw I wouldn't be swayed, he left without saying goodbye, and I knew I'd lost him forever. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My cousin Rachel, who'd always been my grandmother's favourite, discovered a second set of books hidden in the compound's old carriage house. These records went back 50 years, documenting hundreds of deaths, the evolution of feeding techniques to maximise weight gain while minimising visible health problems, and correspondence with other families running similar operations across the country. The letters discussed everything from optimal feeding schedules to which judges could be bribed to look the other way when girls died. Rachel faced an impossible choice. She'd been raised by our grandmother after her parents died in a car accident, treated as the chosen heir to the family empire. But confronted with evidence of generational murder for profit, she chose justice. Under cover of darkness, she photographed every page and smuggled the memory card out through a kitchen worker whose own daughter was currently in the preparation house. The new evidence reached investigators within days, transforming the case from local abuse to organised crime. The historical records proved this wasn't ancient tradition, but a calculated business model that had evolved to maximise profits while minimising risk. Letters between matriarchs discussed market rates for different weight categories, strategies for hiding deaths from authorities, and even a primitive insurance system where families would compensate each other if a girl died before marriage. One particularly damning document outlined the ideal weight gain curve to maximize bride price while keeping the girl alive just long enough to complete the marriage transaction. My grandmother's empire began crumbling faster than anyone anticipated. Several house matrons, facing potential criminal charges for their role in force-feeding and abuse, agreed to cooperate with investigators. They revealed the full extent of the operation, including suppliers who provided illegal appetite stimulants, doctors who falsified health certificates to hide the girls' deteriorating conditions, and a network of families who shared techniques for breaking girls' resistance. One matron even provided recordings of strategy sessions where they discussed using sleep deprivation and psychological manipulation to make girls more compliant. The compound's atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Guards whispered among themselves, some questioning whether their loyalty was worth potential imprisonment. The cooks began reducing portion sizes, no longer willing to participate in force-feeding that might make them accomplices to murder. Even my grandmother's most trusted allies showed signs of wavering as the legal consequences became clear. Several families quietly began moving assets offshore, preparing for lawsuits from survivors and the families of girls who'd died. My imprisonment took a new turn when they decided to break my spirit through complete isolation. They removed all furniture from my room, leaving only a thin mat on the concrete floor. Meals became erratic, sometimes arriving cold, sometimes not at all. They hoped hunger would make me more compliant when feeding resumed. Instead, the hardship strengthened my resolve. Every discomfort reminded me why we'd started this rebellion, why no girl should ever face this choice between family and survival. I exercised in secret during the long hours alone, maintaining my strength through bodyweight exercises in the darkness. Push-ups, squats, and yoga poses kept my muscles from atrophying and my mind focused. I recited the names from the death books like a prayer, keeping their memory alive when everything else felt hopeless. Sarah, Melissa, Jennifer, and all the others became my companions in solitude, their sacrifice giving meaning to my suffering. The investigation's scope continued expanding. Journalists began covering the story, though my grandmother's influence initially kept it from major outlets. But in the age of social media, truth has a way of spreading despite attempts to suppress it. Survivors began sharing their stories online, posting photos of their medical records and the lasting damage to their bodies. International health organizations expressed concern about reports emerging from our region, comparing it to other harmful cultural practices they'd worked to eliminate. Several girls from our original resistance group managed to escape their family compounds during this period. They fled to sympathetic relatives or sought protection from women's advocacy groups that were beginning to understand the scope of the abuse. Each escape story inspired others, creating a slow exodus of girls refusing to accept their fate as fattened brides. Safe houses were established in nearby cities, often run by women who'd survived the process themselves and wanted to save others from their fate. My sister Emma's situation grew desperate. The constant monitoring and force-feeding had begun taking its toll. Through our network, I learned she'd gained 40 pounds in 2 months despite her best efforts at resistance. Her ankles had swollen so badly she could barely walk, and she'd developed a persistent cough from the strain on her respiratory system. The house matrons tried presenting her as a success story, proof that even the strongest resistors could be broken, but they couldn't hide her deteriorating health. During a mandatory medical check required by the new oversight measures, a sympathetic nurse documented Emma's condition in detail. She noted the edema in her extremities, the labored breathing, the early signs of congestive heart failure that no teenager should exhibit. The nurse leaked the report to investigators, and photos of Emma's swollen joints and struggle to breathe became evidence of the practice's immediate danger to current victims, not just historical harm. My grandmother made one last attempt to salvage her system. She organized a meeting of all the traditional families, proposing they create their own oversight committee to self-regulate the practice before the government imposed external controls. They would set reasonable weight targets based on health metrics, ensure basic medical monitoring, and establish maximum time limits for the preparation process. She presented it as a compromise that preserved tradition while addressing safety concerns. The proposal divided even her supporters. Some saw it as necessary adaptation to avoid complete shutdown, while others viewed any change as betrayal of their ancestors and capitulation to modern corruption. The meeting devolved into bitter arguments, with families accusing each other of weakness or extremism. Some walked out in disgust. Others threatened violence against those willing to compromise. The unified front my grandmother had maintained for decades finally shattered completely. Meanwhile, investigators had built a comprehensive case. Financial forensics experts traced millions in bride price transactions through shell companies and offshore accounts. Medical experts testified about the severe health risks of rapid weight gain, particularly in teenagers whose bodies were still developing. Former house matrons revealed the psychological tactics used to break girls' resistance, including sleep deprivation, social isolation, and constant threats against their families. The evidence painted a picture of organized, systematic abuse that shocked even experienced prosecutors. The compound's security began breaking down as guards abandoned their posts rather than face arrest. Some left quietly in the night, taking whatever payment they could grab. Others actively aided the investigation, providing investigators with keys and codes in exchange for leniency. My grandmother's iron control slipped with each defection, her empire crumbling from within as surely as from external pressure. I marked my days in isolation by scratching lines on the wall with a loose piece of concrete, creating a calendar of my captivity. 63 days of darkness, hunger, and resistance. My body had grown thin despite their attempts to fatten me, but my mind remained sharp. I practiced the testimony I would give when finally freed, organizing evidence and experiences into a coherent narrative that could convict those responsible and protect future generations. The turning point arrived through Margaret's mother's continued courage. She organized a group of progressive mothers to demand their daughter's immediate release from all preparation houses. They arrived at compounds across the district simultaneously, some accompanied by health workers and legal advocates, others simply armed with the fury of mothers who'd finally understood what they'd allowed to happen to their children. The coordinated action overwhelmed the traditional family's ability to respond or cover up. At my grandmother's compound, the confrontation was fierce. Mothers who'd once been friends faced off across the courtyard, shouting accusations and defenses that revealed years of suppressed doubt and guilt. Some demanded their daughters immediately, threatening to break down doors if necessary. Others insisted tradition must be upheld, that their mothers and grandmothers had survived the process, and their daughters would too. The arrival of police to maintain order shifted the power dynamic decisively toward the progressives. My grandmother emerged from her house, leaning heavily on her cane but radiating authority. She surveyed the crowd with contempt, declaring that weak mothers would raise weak daughters who would bring shame upon their families and die alone and unmourned. She accused the progressive families of abandoning their culture for modern corruption, of being influenced by outsiders who didn't understand their ways. Her words, once carrying the weight of divine mandate in our community, now sounded like the desperate ranting of a cornered tyrant. The crowd's response surprised everyone, including me listening from my cell. Several traditional mothers stepped forward, admitting their own daughters had died in the preparation houses over the years. They'd remained silent out of shame and fear, told that their daughters' deaths were their own fault for producing weak offspring, but the mounting evidence had broken their complicity. Each testimony added weight to the investigators' case, proving that the death toll was even higher than the records showed. My Uncle Michael attempted to restore order through intimidation, grabbing one of the progressive mothers and shaking her while screaming about family honor. But instead of cowering as they might have in the past, she stood firm, and other women immediately surrounded her in protection. The physical confrontation he'd intended to end resistance only strengthened it, showing that the old methods of control no longer worked. When he raised his hand to strike, 3 women stepped between them. and he backed down in the face of their unified defiance. Inside my dark cell, I heard the commotion but couldn't see what was happening. The guard at my door had abandoned her post, drawn by the drama outside. I pressed my ear against the ventilation grate, straining to understand the shouted words and growing chaos. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope that my imprisonment might be ending, that the sacrifice of so many girls might finally lead to change. The standoff continued for hours. Progressive mothers refused to leave without their daughters, while traditional families refused to release them. Police officers tried negotiating a peaceful resolution, but positions had hardened beyond compromise. As darkness fell, the progressive mothers began setting up camps in the courtyard, making it clear they wouldn't leave until every girl was freed. They'd brought tents, sleeping bags, and enough supplies for a long siege. That night, something fundamental shifted in the compound's atmosphere. The remaining guards whispered urgently among themselves, some packing their belongings and slipping away. Cooks prepared final meals with tears in their eyes, knowing they were participating in abuse for the last time. Even the most loyal servants sensed the old order crumbling and began choosing sides. My grandmother's empire, built on the bodies of fattened girls over generations, faced its final hours. The next morning brought decisive action. Health officials arrived with court orders demanding immediate access to all girls in the compound. They were accompanied by social workers trained in cult deprogramming, medical personnel equipped for emergency intervention, and a massive police presence that made resistance impossible. My grandmother's lawyers protested, filing emergency injunctions and claiming religious persecution. But their objections were overruled by judges who'd seen the evidence. Room by room, officials documented conditions and freed imprisoned girls. The scenes were heartbreaking as daughters reunited with progressive mothers while traditional families raged against the intervention. Some girls had been so thoroughly broken they didn't want to leave, terrified of life outside the compound and convinced they were worthless without the weight gain. Medical teams immediately began assessing health conditions, finding cases of severe malnutrition among resistors alongside life-threatening obesity in those who'd been successfully force-fed. When they finally reached my isolation cell, I could barely stand after 64 days of resistance. The health worker who examined me wept openly at my condition, documenting the bruises from force-feeding attempts, the malnutrition from my hunger strikes, and the psychological impact of prolonged isolation. They wrapped me in blankets and carried me out into sunlight I hadn't seen in over 2 months. My mother waited outside, her face a battlefield of emotions. Relief at seeing me alive warred with shame at what she'd allowed. Love struggled with the indoctrination of generations. I walked past her without speaking, knowing forgiveness would require time and genuine change on her part. My priority was reuniting with the other girls and ensuring our testimony would prevent future generations from suffering. The compound emptied over the course of that day as girls were either reunited with supportive families or placed in protective custody. My grandmother watched from her window, her empire dissolving with each departure. The matriarchs who'd built their wealth and power on this system faced investigation, their assets frozen pending civil and criminal proceedings. But our work wasn't finished, only transformed. Some traditional families regrouped, seeking new locations to continue their practices in secret. They spread propaganda about cultural destruction, claiming foreign influence had corrupted their daughters and destroyed a beautiful tradition. Some communities rallied to their defense, viewing the investigation as an attack on their identity rather than protection of their children. We responded by sharing our stories even more widely, speaking at schools, community centers, and anywhere people would listen. Every girl who'd survived the preparation house had a testimony of abuse, fear, and health destruction. We spoke not as rebels against culture, but as daughters who'd nearly died for a tradition that had lost its way. The death books became our most powerful evidence, names and weights that couldn't be denied or explained away. When traditional supporters claimed we were exaggerating, we simply showed them the profit calculations next to each dead girl's name. My sister Emma required months of medical treatment to recover from her ordeal. The rapid weight gain had damaged her joints, strained her heart, and left her with diabetes that would require lifelong management. Watching her struggle to walk even short distances reminded us why this fight mattered. She became one of our most powerful speakers, her visible suffering contradicting claims that the practice was harmless tradition. When she spoke to audiences, her labored breathing made more impact than any words. The investigation revealed the practice's economic scope exceeded even our worst fears. Millions flowed through bride prices, creating an entire underground economy. Suppliers of weight gain products, doctors who provided appetite stimulants, and falsified health certificates. Even some police officers and judges had profited from the system. Each revelation strengthened the case for systematic reform rather than individual prosecutions. This wasn't about bad actors, but about a corrupted system that needed to be dismantled entirely. Some traditional families attempted to adapt rather than abandon the practice entirely. They proposed moderate fattening that wouldn't endanger health, weight gain spread over longer periods, or using padding only for ceremonies while maintaining normal weight otherwise. They missed the fundamental point that our bodies weren't commodities to be shaped for sale, that our value didn't depend on our weight. We rejected any compromise that continued treating girls as products rather than people with inherent worth. The Resistance Network evolved into a comprehensive support system for survivors. We created safe houses for girls fleeing forced fattening, partnering with domestic violence organizations that understood coercive control. Medical clinics specifically trained in treating weight-related abuse provided free care for those suffering complications. Educational programs helped girls whose schooling had been interrupted catch up and pursue their dreams. Each girl we helped strengthened our movement and proved that life existed beyond the preparation house. My grandmother made one final attempt to reassert control over the narrative. She gave interviews to sympathetic media outlets, painting herself as a guardian of tradition under attack by corrupted youth. She declared that any girl who rejected the old ways would be cast out from the family forever with no inheritance, no support, no recognition as daughters. She believed the threat of complete abandonment would break our resolve and bring wayward girls back into the fold. Instead, her ultimatum freed us. Girls who'd wavered, torn between resistance and family loyalty, found clarity in her declaration. If the choice was between our lives and their approval, we chose life. The declaration meant to divide us only unified our purpose. We created our own families, bonds forged in shared survival that proved stronger than blood. When traditional families disowned their daughters, progressive families adopted them in spirit, if not law. The Health Ministry's final report was damning beyond what even we had expected. They documented systematic abuse across multiple states, medical negligence that bordered on murder, and hundreds of preventable deaths over decades. Their recommendations included criminal charges for the worst offenders, comprehensive reform of cultural practices that endangered health, and ongoing monitoring of at-risk communities. The report became a watershed moment in protecting children from harmful traditions disguised as culture. As the legal proceedings began, we faced a new challenge. Some girls, broken by their experiences, struggled to testify. The trauma of forced feeding, isolation, and family rejection had left deep psychological scars that made even speaking about their experience painful. We supported each other through the difficult process, holding hands during depositions, providing testimony in groups when individual statements were too hard. Our collective voice carried weight that no single story could match. The traditional family's defense relied heavily on cultural relativism and religious freedom arguments. They brought in anthropologists who testified about the historical significance of weight in marriage negotiations, religious leaders who quoted scripture about honoring parents and tradition. But we weren't outsiders imposing foreign values. We were daughters who'd survived their tradition and found it wanting. Our voices, our scars, our ongoing health problems provided evidence that no expert testimony could refute. My grandmother's trial became a symbol of the larger conflict between tradition and human rights. She sat unmoved through days of testimony as girl after girl described their experiences. Only when prosecutors presented the profit ledgers showing she'd calculated earnings from her own granddaughter's deaths did her composure crack. The numbers revealed a cold business calculation behind claims of cultural preservation. She'd documented profit margins next to the names of girls she'd claimed to love. The verdict, when it came, brought neither celebration nor closure. Guilty on multiple counts of human trafficking, child endangerment, and criminal conspiracy. The sentence of 25 years meant she would likely die in prison, but it couldn't bring back the girls who'd already died or heal those still suffering. Other matriarchs received similar sentences, while house matrons and collaborating medical professionals faced their own prosecutions. The legal victory felt hollow compared to the human cost, but change, real change, began to take root. Communities that had practiced the tradition for generations began questioning all their assumptions about value, beauty, and women's roles. Some found ways to honor their heritage while protecting their daughters, replacing weight gain with education funds or skill training. Others abandoned the marriage market entirely, encouraging their daughters to pursue careers and choose their own partners based on love rather than pounds. We continued our work, knowing lasting change required more than legal victories. Education programs taught girls about nutrition and health, but also about their intrinsic worth, regardless of size. Economic initiatives provided alternatives to bride prices for family income, including small business loans for women and job training programs. Medical clinics specifically trained in treating eating disorders and weight-related trauma provided ongoing care for survivors. The network we'd built for resistance transformed into a foundation for recovery and prevention. Girls who'd once shared techniques for fake weight gain now shared strategies for building healthy lives. We supported each other through family reconciliations when possible and chosen family creation when necessary. Some found peace with relatives who genuinely changed, while others built new lives entirely separate from their blood families. My relationship with my family remained complicated for years. My mother eventually acknowledged the harm she'd allowed and began her own journey of understanding how she'd been indoctrinated from birth. My father struggled longer, his identity so tied to tradition that accepting its harm meant questioning everything he'd believed. Only my younger cousins, seeing our strength and independence, fully embraced the changes we'd fought to create. They grew up knowing their worth wasn't measured in pounds, but in their dreams, abilities, and character. The compound where I'd been imprisoned was eventually converted into a treatment centre for girls recovering from weight-related abuse. It felt like poetic justice to see examination rooms where girls had been weighed like livestock transformed into therapy spaces where they learned to love their bodies as they were. The preparation house became a museum documenting the practice, ensuring future generations understood both the harm and the heroism of those who resisted. I went on to law school, driven by a desire to protect other girls from harmful traditions masquerading as culture. Other survivors became doctors, social workers, teachers, and advocates. We spread across professions but remained connected by our shared experience and commitment to prevention. When new cases emerged in other communities, we were ready with legal support, safe houses, and the hard-won knowledge of how to break these cycles. Looking back now, 20 years after that wedding viewing changed everything, I see both how far we've come and how far we still have to go. The preparation houses are gone, but the attitudes that created them persist in some communities. Girls are still valued differently than boys, still taught that their bodies exist for others' approval, still pressured to modify themselves for marriage markets that shouldn't exist. Our work continues with each generation, teaching them to question, to resist, to value themselves. The death books are now in a national archive, preserved as evidence of what happens when tradition becomes more important than human lives. Sarah, Melissa, Jennifer, and hundreds of others are remembered not as victims but as catalysts for change. Their deaths weren't in vain if we continue fighting to ensure no girl faces the choice between family and survival, between tradition and life. My sister Emma still struggles with the health consequences of her time in the preparation house. Diabetes, joint problems, and respiratory issues are her daily companions. But she's also a mother now. Raising daughters who will never know the inside of a preparation house, will never be weighed and sold. When they ask about the scars on her body and the pain in her movements, she tells them the truth in age-appropriate ways. She's ensuring they understand both their heritage and their freedom from its harmful parts. The economic systems that sustain the fattening tradition have slowly transformed in most communities. Families find new sources of income and pride that don't involve selling their daughters. Girls are valued for their minds, their talents, their contributions to family and society beyond their weight. It's imperfect progress with setbacks and resistance, but progress nonetheless. My grandmother died in prison 5 years into her sentence. Since unrepentant to the end. Her funeral divided our community one final time between those mourning a cultural guardian and those relieved by an abuser's passing. I attended, standing with other survivors in silent witness. Our presence was a final act of defiance against her legacy, but also an acknowledgement that she too was shaped by the system she perpetuated. Breaking cycles means understanding how they capture even those who benefit from them. Today, I run an organization dedicated to ending harmful cultural practices worldwide. We work within communities respecting cultural identity while challenging specific traditions that cause harm. It's delicate work, requiring patience, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to protecting vulnerable children. We've learned that sustainable change comes from within communities, not imposed from outside, but that sometimes insider voices need external support to be heard. The lessons from our resistance apply beyond our specific tradition. Around the world, children face harmful practices justified by culture, tradition, or religion. Female genital cutting, child marriage, honor killings, conversion therapy, and countless other abuses hide behind claims of cultural authenticity. Our story proves that culture isn't static, that tradition can evolve, that protecting children doesn't mean abandoning identity. When I speak to young people today, I see hope in their questions and challenges. They don't accept because we've always done it this way as an answer. They understand that honoring ancestors doesn't mean repeating their mistakes, that culture lives and grows through each generation's contributions. They give me faith that the cycles we broke will stay broken, that our daughters and granddaughters will know freedom we could only fight for. The scars remain physical and emotional across our community and others like it, but scars tell stories of survival, of resistance, of change. We wear ours as reminders of where we've been and markers of where we're going. The work isn't finished and may never be completely finished. New forms of control emerge as old ones fall. But we continue forward, one girl, one family, one tradition at a time, building a world where every child's worth is inherent, not measured by scales or sales. My story, our story, is both unique and universal. The details differ across cultures, but the struggle for bodily autonomy, for the right to define our own worth, for freedom from harmful traditions, resonates everywhere. We share our testimony not to shame our communities, but to strengthen them by removing practices that weaken and destroy. True cultural pride comes from protecting all members, especially the most vulnerable. The network of survivors continues to grow and evolve. We mentor young women facing family pressure, provide emergency support for those fleeing harmful situations, and work with progressive families to create new traditions that celebrate rather than exploit. Each wedding celebrated without a bride price. Each girl who graduates instead of being sold. Each family that measures success in happiness rather than pounds proves that change is possible. Sometimes I dream about the girls in those death books, wondering who they might have become if given the chance. Doctors, artists, mothers, leaders, or simply happy women living ordinary lives of their own choosing. Their stolen potential drives our continued advocacy, ensuring their deaths catalyst lasting transformation. We carry their names and stories forward, speaking for those who can no longer speak for themselves. The preparation houses stand empty now in most communities, monuments to a harmful past and hopeful future. Some have been demolished, their bricks scattered to prevent any attempt at restoration. Others serve new purposes, as community centres, schools or clinics, their dark history transformed into spaces of healing and growth. Each empty room that once held a frightened girl now holds possibility for daughters who will never know that particular fear. My mother, in her final years, became one of our strongest advocates. Her journey from enforcer to protector wasn't easy or quick, but it was genuine. She spent her last decade speaking to other mothers about breaking generational patterns, about choosing their daughters' lives over tradition. Her funeral, unlike my grandmother's, united our community in grief for someone who'd found the courage to change. Her evolution gave hope to others struggling with similar transformations. The legal precedents set by our cases continue protecting girls in other contexts. Judges now recognize coercive control, even when disguised as cultural practice. Skin. Laws explicitly protect children from harmful traditions regardless of parental consent. Social services trained in culturally sensitive intervention can remove children from dangerous situations while respecting legitimate cultural practices. The framework we fought to create saves lives beyond our specific tradition. International attention to our movement helped similar resistance in other countries. We shared strategies, successes, and failures with activists fighting different but related battles. The specific practices varied, but the underlying dynamics of control, profit, and justified abuse remained constant. Our network became global, supporting resistance to harmful traditions wherever they emerged. As I write this final chapter, I'm surrounded by evidence of transformation. My office walls display photos of survivors who've built amazing lives, newspaper clippings documenting legal victories, and letters from girls thanking us for showing them resistance was possible. But the most meaningful decoration is a simple frame containing one page from the death books, a reminder of why we can never stop fighting. The tradition that nearly killed me, that did kill so many others, no longer holds the power it once did. But its shadow lingers in communities still practicing variations, in families still measuring daughters' worth by destructive standards. Our work continues because somewhere tonight, a girl is being told her value depends on changing her body for others' profit. Somewhere, a mother is wrestling with generations of indoctrination. Somewhere, a community is deciding whether tradition or children's lives matter more. To those girls, those mothers, those communities, we offer our story as proof that change is possible. Resistance is possible. Survival is possible. Life beyond harmful tradition is not only possible, but beautiful. The path isn't easy and the cost is real, but freedom tastes sweeter than any feast they'll force down your throat. Your body is yours. Your life is yours. Your worth is inherent, not measured in pounds or profit. The network stands ready to help those ready to resist. Safe houses, legal support, medical care, and most importantly, the knowledge that you're not alone. Others have walked this path and survived. Others have broken these chains and thrived. The tradition tells you resistance means isolation and death. We're living proof that resistance means community and life. 20 years after I discovered those death books, I can say with certainty that every risk was worth it. Every punishment, every lost relationship, every moment of fear and doubt led to freedom for countless girls who will never know the inside of a preparation house. They'll grow up believing their bodies belong to them. Their worth is inherent, and their futures are their own to shape. That's the true tradition we're creating and passing forward. To Sarah, Melissa, Jennifer, and all the others whose names filled those terrible ledgers, we remember you. Your deaths were not in vain. Your stories fuel our continued fight. Your memory protects girls you never met. You are not forgotten, and because of you, others live. That's the only memorial that matters, the only tradition worth preserving. The tradition of protecting children, of choosing life over profit, of breaking harmful cycles no matter the cost. The story continues with each girl who reads this and recognizes her own situation, each family that questions its practices, each community that chooses children over tradition. We've proven change is possible. Now it's up to each generation to continue that change, to remain vigilant against new forms of old oppression, to protect those who can't yet protect themselves. My body bears the scars of resistance, but my spirit soars with the freedom we achieved. Every girl walking free instead of waddling in pain, every woman choosing her own path instead of being sold, every family measuring worth in love rather than pounds, makes every sacrifice worthwhile. The tradition tried to break us. Instead, we broke the tradition. And in breaking it, we found ourselves, our strength, and our true worth that no scale could ever measure. This is our story, but it's also yours. If you're trapped in any tradition that harms rather than honors, that profits from pain, that measures worth by destructive standards, you are not alone. Resistance is possible. Change is possible. Life beyond harmful tradition is possible. The network of survivors stands ready to help you write your own story of resistance, survival, and transformation. Break the chains. Choose life. Your worth is not measured in pounds or profit, but in your inherent dignity as a human being. That's the only tradition worth preserving, the only legacy worth leaving. Everything else is just the weight they try to make you carry. Put it down. Walk free. We're waiting to welcome you home to yourself.